Welcome to 1 Minute to Midnight. I'm Wilfred Cunningham. This week, a lasting ceasefire in Yemen appeared to be close, and German Chancellor Angela Merkel allowed the German state to begin proceedings against one of its citizens for insulting the president of Turkey. Of course, that's not the only thing that's been happening. If the Earth were a grape, the moon would be 16 inches away, and the Milky Way would be 55 billion miles wide. There are 200 billion galaxies in the universe. Who knows what has and is happening? Yet our current understanding of physics means that to even visit the nearest star, it may take a longer time than spoken language has existed for. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the Yemeni civil war. On April the 10th, a brokered truce came into effect, but there was intense fighting in the Yemen capital, Sana'a, leading up to the truce, and breaches in various places, including Taiz, after it began. Despite this, the ceasefire reportedly began to be more rigorously enforced on the 16th of April, and the rhetoric of spokesmen representing the two sides, the Abd Rabbu Mansur Hadi-led government, based in Aden, and Ansar Allah, also known as the Houthis, has been conciliatory. On the 15th of April, the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed, who will be leading peace talks next week between the Hadi-led government and Ansar Allah, said that peace has never been as close. Mohammed Gabari, writing for Reuters, argues that a lull in the fighting that began in March could be attributed to war weariness. So why did civil war erupt in Yemen? During what is often referred to as the Arab Spring, in which people rose up against their governments in countries including Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Syria, the Yemeni people too revolted and called for the resignation of Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Wide-scale defections from the military and government rendered Saleh unable to stop the movement against him. Saleh was forced to cede power to his deputy, Hadi, on the 27th of February 2012, ending his 22-year rule of Yemen, which was preceded by his 12-year presidency of North Yemen. Ansar Allah, or the Houthis, are Zaidis who account for around 30% of the Yemeni population. Prior to 1962, when the North Yemen civil war began, the Houthis controlled part of what is now modern-day Yemen for around 1,000 years. Since 2004, they have waged an insurgency against the government and supported the ousting of Saleh during the revolution. Apparently unhappy at the handing over of power to Hadi, who stood as the only candidate in the 2014 election, and fearing his government planned to federalize Yemen, Ansar Allah seized most of Sana'a in late 2014 and the presidential compound in the city in January 2015, forcing Hadi to resign. However, he later escaped Sana'a and resumed his active opposition to the group from the city of Aden. On March the 19th, 2015, the civil war began proper, with the Battle of Aden Airport. On March the 20th, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansar Allah, declared that it was imperative that his group fight Hadi forces and al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, while subsequent intervention from a Saudi-led coalition, largely in the form of airstrikes but later in the form of Sudanese combat troops, did push Ansar Allah out of Aden. The group remains in control of the capital and much of the country. It is often reported as fact that Ansar Allah is supported, secretly, by Iran. Both deny allegations of funding or training, and a US intelligence document from 2009 suggests little Iranian involvement in Yemen other than investments and religious ties. That may or may not have changed, but no connection has so far been proven. More evidence seems to exist that Saleh, who has publicly denounced Hadi, may have actively aided his successor's downfall. It remains unclear if a nationwide ceasefire can last, and if a peace process can begin any time soon. If the fighting does continue, ISIS and Al-Qaeda will no doubt take advantage of the chaos and seize more territory. On the 31st of March, German TV channel ZDF Neo broadcast an episode of Neo Magazine Royale, a show broadcast weekly since late 2013. In that episode, Jan Böhmermann recited a poem about Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, deliberately following up on a music video broadcast on the 17th of March 2016 by NDR Fernsehen and 3Sat, which heavily criticised Erdogan. The music video, which first appeared on the programme Extra 3, led to Erdogan summoning the German ambassador to Turkey, Martin Erdmann. The German government declined to intervene, as German laws allow for free criticism and satire. However, under German law, what can be translated as abusive criticism or simply insulting foreign leaders is prohibited, but the law leaves it to the government to decide whether to authorise prosecutors to pursue such cases. Böhmermann's poem about Erdogan included no or little political criticism, but was designed to be an attack on the man, as well as a test of Germany's laws outlawing insults directed at foreign leaders of states, versus Germany's laws protecting freedom of speech and expression. Sometime over the weekend of the 9th and 10th of April, the Turkish embassy issued a formal request with the German Foreign Ministry to prosecute Böhmermann. On the 11th of April, Erdogan launched a private lawsuit against Böhmermann over the poem. On Tuesday the 12th of April, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said the following:
Unbeschadet davon will ich noch einmal betonen, was auch gestern schon betont wurde. Wir haben die Grundwerte des Grundgesetzes und dazu gehört der Artikel 5. Das ist die Freiheit der Meinung, der Wissenschaft und natürlich auch der Kunst. Und diese Grundwerte gelten unbeschadet aller politischen Probleme, die wir miteinander besprechen. Und dazu gehört auch das Thema der Flüchtlinge. Und ich glaube, dass es ein Interesse der Türkei und ein Interesse der Europäischen Union und damit auch Deutschlands gibt, hier eine politische Lösung zu finden, eine Legalisierung auch von Flüchtlingsbewegungen, eine Teilung der Lasten, die wir haben. Die Türkei trägt hier eine sehr hohe Last im Zusammenhang mit dem syrischen Bürgerkrieg. Aber das alles ist völlig unabhängig davon, dass die Grundrechte in Deutschland und damit auch der Artikel 5 und die Freiheit von Presse, Meinung und Wissenschaft gelten und davon völlig entkoppelt sind.
Despite Merkel's assertion that the ongoing negotiations between the European Union and Turkey about the placement of refugees and migrants from Syria, to which she is very important, must be separated from the proceedings surrounding Böhmermann's poem, on April the 15th she approved the prosecution of Böhmermann, in what many have criticised as an appeasing move aimed at minimising any obstacles in EU-Turkey negotiations. At the same time, Merkel announced that the German government would repeal the law against insulting foreign state leaders, suggesting that although bound by the law, she does not necessarily agree with it. Merkel has faced criticism from in and outside of Germany, much of which adheres to the head of the Green Party, Anton Hofreiter's statement. Now she has to live with the accusation that the deal with Turkey became more important to her than freedom of speech. Erdogan has been accused of limiting the freedom of press in Turkey, particularly in more recent times. On the 4th of March, Turkish authorities seized Zaman, the country's most widely circulated newspaper, and placed it under the administration of a court-appointed panel of trustees. The paper, which had been critical of Erdogan, has since changed its editorial stance to one that many commentators have described as pro-government propaganda. Other news outlets have had similar takeovers, and many see recent legislation by the government as deliberately curtailing free speech and free press. Notably, news organisations that showed coverage of anti-government protests in 2013 were fined, and in 2014, the government blocked Twitter and YouTube. A political survivor, Erdogan, who was the Prime Minister from 2003 to 2014, and who then assumed the presidency, can only be re-elected to serve another 5-year term, once. So his opponents will only have to endure him for a maximum of another 8 years, unless he changes the law. So, until next time, goodbye, and try to remain calm.